The rain poured heavily as Officer Bradley tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his patrol car idling outside a convenience store. It had been a long shift, and frustration lingered in his mind. That's when he spotted her, standing by a parked car, phone in hand, her pregnant belly noticeable even through her loose jacket. To him, she looked suspicious. His instincts, or rather his biases, kicked in. He stepped out, adjusting his belt as he approached. "Ma'am, what are you doing here?" His voice was sharp, demanding. The woman turned, her face calm but tired. She winced slightly, placing a hand on her belly. "I'm waiting for someone," she said, her breath unsteady. But Bradley wasn't listening. Something about her, the way she looked, the way she carried herself, made him uneasy. He asked for ID, pressing her for answers she didn't owe him. "I don't have time for this," she said, wincing again. A sharp pain ran through her body. The baby was coming. "Hands behind your back." Bradley snapped, reaching for his cuffs. He wasn't about to let her walk away. The woman gasped, pain and shock mixing in her expression. But just as he grabbed her wrist, the sirens of another patrol car blared from behind. A door slammed. "Bradley, stand down." A commanding voice cut through the rain. The officer turned, confused, his grip loosened. The woman took a slow, deep breath, fighting through the contractions. Then, with a calm but firm voice, she spoke. "Officer, I am Captain Lisa Carter, and my water just broke." Bradley's face went pale. The world around him seemed to stop, and in that moment, he realized he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Officer Bradley's grip loosened completely as he took a step back, his pulse racing. "Captain," he looked at her again, this time really seeing her. Beads of sweat glistened on her forehead as she clenched her jaw, clearly fighting through the pain. His mind scrambled for an explanation, but there was none, only the reality of what he had just done. Another officer rushed forward, his badge gleaming under the streetlights. Sergeant Mitchell. Unlike Bradley, he knew exactly who she was. Captain Carter. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Lisa took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. "No, I'm not," she admitted, gripping the side of the car for support. "I need to get to a hospital." Bradley felt a wave of panic rise in his chest. He had been so focused on controlling the situation, so quick to judge, that he hadn't even noticed the signs. The way she had been holding her stomach, the way she struggled to stand still. Now, it was too late to take back what he had done. Mitchell shot Bradley a sharp look. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he hissed, lowering his voice. Bradley swallowed hard, but before he could answer, Lisa let out a sharp gasp. Her knees buckled slightly, and Mitchell quickly moved to steady her. "We don't have time for this," she muttered through gritted teeth. "I need to go now." But before anyone could move, the radio on Bradley's shoulder crackled to life. "Dispatch to all units. We have an urgent situation nearby. Officers needed immediately." Bradley stood frozen, caught between the call of duty and the undeniable truth. He had arrested a fellow officer, a superior, in the middle of labor. Bradley's mind raced as the radio crackled again, the dispatcher's voice urgent. His instinct told him to respond, to do his job, but the weight of his mistake pinned him in place. He glanced at Captain Carter, her face tight with pain, her breaths coming faster. She was in trouble, and he had wasted precious time. Mitchell wasn't waiting. He grabbed his own radio. "Dispatch, this is Sergeant Mitchell. We have an emergency here. Captain Lisa Carter is in labor and needs immediate transport to the hospital. I'll handle this. Over." There was a pause. Then the dispatcher's voice returned, this time more cautious. "Captain Carter. Copy that, Sergeant. Sending medical assistance now." Bradley could barely breathe. Captain Carter. He had thrown a pregnant police captain in cuffs. The thought made his stomach turn. His grip tightened around his belt as the reality of the situation settled deeper into his bones. Lisa leaned against the car, her face damp with sweat. "Mitchell," she said, her voice weaker now, "get me out of these cuffs." Mitchell shot a glare at Bradley, who fumbled for his keys, his hands suddenly clumsy. The cuffs clicked open, and Lisa let out a shaky breath, rubbing her wrists. But just as relief began to settle in, the radio flared up again. "Attention all units. Suspect on the run, armed and dangerous. Last seen near your location." Mitchell tensed. Lisa squeezed her eyes shut for a second, frustration clear on her face. "Of course," she muttered under her breath. Bradley's pulse pounded. The tension in the air shifted. There was no time for apologies, no time for regrets. Now they had another problem, a dangerous suspect close by, and Lisa barely able to stand. Bradley's heart pounded as his eyes flicked between Lisa and the dark streets beyond. The suspect was out there, lurking somewhere close, and here he was, standing next to a woman in labor, a woman he had wrongfully detained, who also happened to outprank him. The weight of his mistake was suffocating, but there was no time to dwell on it now. Mitchell was already scanning the area, his hand resting on his holster. "We need to move," he said firmly. "Medical is on the way, but if that suspect is nearby, we can't just stand out in the open." Lisa groaned, gripping the car door for support. I can't run, Mitchell." Her voice was strained, her body trembling from the effort of just standing. Bradley swallowed hard. His training told him to focus on the suspect, but his gut twisted at the thought of leaving her vulnerable. This was his mess, and now, for the first time that night, his priorities felt clear. "I'll secure the perimeter," Bradley said quickly. "You stay with her." Mitchell didn't argue. He could see the shift in Bradley's face, the sharp realization that he had to make things right. Without another word, Bradley stepped away, scanning the empty lot, his hands steady on his weapon. The rain had slowed, but the air was thick with tension. Then, a noise. A rustling behind the dumpster near the alley. Bradley's breath caught. He inched forward, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Police," he called out. "Show yourself." Silence. Then, movement. A shadow darted out from behind the dumpster, fast and desperate. A gun flashed in the dim light. Bradley barely had time to react before the first shot rang out. The gunshot shattered the silence, echoing through the empty lot. Bradley barely had time to duck, his pulse hammering in his ears. His hand went instinctively to his holster as he dropped behind a parked car, his breath coming in sharp bursts. The suspect wasn't running anymore. He was standing his ground. Shots fired. Shots fired. Bradley barked into his radio. His fingers tightened around his weapon, his mind racing. One wrong move, and this could spiral even further out of control. Mitchell shoved Lisa down behind the patrol car, shielding her with his body. "Stay down," he ordered. Lisa clenched her teeth, her contractions coming faster. "This is bad," she muttered. "Really bad." Bradley peered around the car, his flashlight catching the suspect's outline, a wiry man in dark clothes, his hands shaking as he held the gun. He wasn't just dangerous, he was desperate. "Put the gun down," Bradley called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "You don't want to do this." The man didn't respond. Instead, he took a shaky step back, glancing toward the alley like he was calculating his next move. Bradley could see it happening. He was about to bolt, gun still in hand. If that happened, things would only get worse. Then, before anyone could react, Lisa let out a sharp cry, doubling over. A fresh wave of pain tore through her, her fingers digging into the asphalt. Mitchell turned to her in alarm. And in that split second, the suspect made his move. He spun, his gun flashing up. Bradley's instincts took over. He fired. The suspect dropped. For a brief moment, everything was still. Then Lisa gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "The baby's coming. Now." Bradley's breath came in short gasps as he kept his gun trained on the suspect's motionless body. His hands trembled slightly, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. Mitchell rushed forward, checking for a pulse. "He's alive," he confirmed, pressing his radio. "Suspect down, but breathing. Requesting immediate medical assistance." But Bradley barely heard him. His eyes snapped back to Lisa, who was now on her knees, clutching her stomach. Her face was tight with pain, her breaths coming in shallow, uneven bursts. "Mitchell," she gasped, her voice thin. I can't hold on any longer." Bradley's heart pounded. He had been trained for high-pressure situations, for shootouts, for split-second decisions. But this? A woman giving birth in the middle of a crime scene. A woman he had wrongfully arrested just minutes ago. This was a level of chaos he had never prepared for. Mitchell knelt beside her, his expression tense. "Medical's on the way, just hold on." Lisa shook her head violently. "No time," she gritted out. "The baby's coming now." Bradley's mind screamed at him to do something. Anything. And before he could second-guess himself, he was moving. He dropped to his knees beside her, his training kicking in, not as an officer, but as a human being. "Okay," he said, his voice steady for the first time all night. "We've got you." Lisa barely acknowledged him, too deep in the pain. Mitchell pulled off his jacket, placing it beneath her. "You ever done this before?" Bradley asked, his voice tight. "Not exactly," Mitchell admitted, "but we don't have a choice." Then, before another word could be spoken, the sound of sirens cut through the night. Red and blue lights flashed as paramedics rushed toward them. Bradley exhaled in relief. It was over. Or so he thought. Just as the medics reached them, a weak, strained laugh came from behind. The suspect, still bleeding, lifted his head just enough to croak out, "You have no idea what you've just stepped into." Bradley's stomach dropped. This wasn't over, not even close. Bradley's blood ran cold at the suspect's words. His weak, twisted smile sent a shiver down his spine. But there was no time to question him. The paramedics were already lifting Lisa onto a stretcher, moving quickly as she fought through the pain. Mitchell stayed by her side, his grip firm on her hand. "You're almost there, Captain," he assured her. Lisa's breath was ragged, but she managed a small nod. She wasn't focused on the suspect, on Bradley, or even on the chaos of the night. She had one mission now, bringing her child into the world. Bradley turned to the medics. "She needs to get to hospital now," he said, his voice more certain than it had been all night. As they loaded her into the ambulance, Lisa finally met Bradley's gaze. For a moment, there was no anger, no blame, just exhaustion, pain, and something else. Something that made Bradley swallow hard. Regret. The doors slammed shut, and the ambulance rolled away, its sirens cutting through the night. Bradley exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. The reality of everything hit him at once. His choices, his mistakes, how close he had come to something he could never take back. Mitchell stood beside him, arms crossed. "You messed up tonight," he said simply. Bradley nodded, staring at the blood-streaked pavement. "I know." "Then make sure you learn from it." The suspect groaned as officers cuffed him, dragging him toward a squad car. Whatever he meant by his warning would have to wait. For now, Bradley could only watch as the ambulance disappeared into the distance, carrying the woman he had wronged, and the new life she had fought to protect.